Okay guys, today we're going to learn how to draw class diagrams in Visual Paradigm software. Okay, so again, when you start working, you'll have this interface. So we'll start with creating the project. So for us, the project that we'll create is software engineering. Okay, then we'll create a blank project and we'll select OK. Then the next is we will be creating the diagram. We'll go to the diagram tab, then we'll click on new, then we'll start creating a class diagram. We'll search for class diagram. So we got a class diagram, select that, and then we'll click on next, blank, next. So we'll give it some name, for example, practicum 3, and we'll click on OK. So when you click on OK, this blank space will be opening. Now we'll be starting to create class diagrams. So basically, right, classes will have two components. One is attributes and one is methods. What are attributes? Attributes are the description of the class, and your methods are the functions or the work the classes do. Now you have to create a simple class. Now you have so many items here, right? We have see here, but we'll not be using everything. We'll be using first starting with creating the class. Now today for our use case, we'll be creating a real world scenario where we'll be creating a class diagram with students, then assignments and courses. courses. The first thing while starting with the student, we'll create something called as we'll create a class called as person. Okay. In person, will for student is a person, right? So a person will have certain what we call as this attributes and methods, right? So we'll if you want to create those, you have to right click and you have to select and you have to go to add. In add, you can see here this attribute option. You have to click and you have to give an attribute. The attribute will be, for example, name. Now after that, you have to specify what kind of attribute it is, right? So you have to say it like string. See, it automatically becomes string. Then if you want to create a new attribute, if you press enter, it will go to the creating the new attribute. The next attribute will be create is age, and it will be an int, right? When you click OK, and that's all. We are creating only two attributes for our class called person. Now we need to add the what to call our method. So again we need to click here and you have to right click and you can go to add and you'll have see operation. Operation is nothing but our methods, right? If you click on operation, we'll get it. So now the person, for our example, a person will log in into Edusoft, yes or no. So we are going to create a method called login for our person. Okay, then again we will create another function, for example login. So obviously we'll have something called as logout, right? So you're creating these two functions. Now we can click on add, we can delete this, yes, no, not this one, we'll delete this, yes, we'll just click, uh, we'll click on OK. Okay, so there's some if you click on this, we'll have this something called as delete. We'll just delete. Okay, it's done. Now we can just make it smaller. Okay, the next we'll create another class. So we know there is inheritance, right? We know one class is inherited by another classes or subtree. So we'll create another class here. The class will name it as student. Now again the same procedure. We have to create attributes for this class. So we'll go to add and we'll create attribute. For example, roll number. We can call it as string. Then the next attribute we can add it as enroll. No, enroll will be a function. We'll create a student roll number. That is all. Okay, we need to, okay, done. Then we need to right click, then click on operation. We'll have a function called as enroll. So we'll create a function for the class or the method. We'll call it as enroll or something. For example, you're creating an enroll. Okay, if you by mistake if you press enter, it will create a new function. Don't worry. You just select right click on that function and you can click delete. Also, there are other things. If you just right click, you can see a lot of elements, everything will be there, but will not touch those. Even for attributes, you can see here will be a lot of elements, visibility, getter, etc. We are not going into this. We're just leaving it as it is. Okay. Now the student is done. Now we need to connect. Now we know this student it falls under or it ended as person, right? So we will use this and we'll call dependency. So for inheritance, we'll use dependency. So we'll first click from which one is depending on which. So we'll create the first student is depending on person. So we have created the dependency. Okay. If you move it here, so this is a dependency. You can also create a break in line. If you right click, you can have something here. We can have break in line, but we'll move on to the next one. The next one is creating a class called instructor. Okay, because even an instructor can be a person, right? A person or instructor will have a login and log out. So we'll create instruction, or we can call it teacher. Okay, we'll call the class name teacher. Then again we need to create attribute for this class. So the attribute will be employee ID. That is also a string. We need to mention what kind of data type it is, right? So we'll create. Now we'll delete this. Okay. Yes. Then again we need to create another function that is assign marks, for example. So we'll give an and we'll create an operation called assign marks. Okay, it is done. Now again this is also inheriting this class. So we'll click on dependency. This class is dependent on person. So we can move it here and it's done. Okay. Then next is we'll have something called as another class. We'll call it as course or something, right? We'll need to I'll show you one more thing, but before that we'll create the class. So okay, the class is called as course. Now if you right click, you can click on attribute. Again we'll add code, the course code. So that is also a string. Okay. Then another attribute you can keep a call it the title of the course. That is also a string, right? Now we need to create our sorry, not constructor. It will be I'll right click properly and we'll click on operator. So we'll have add student because we need to add student to the course, right? Okay, we need to delete this. Okay, now I'll drag it here. Now again, this will be not initializing. Okay, this is not generalizing. This is something called as we'll use something called as association because each student will have courses. Yes or no? Now to link them together. For that we'll use instead of dependency. Now we'll learn something called as association. Okay, so what is association? See, when two classes are associated with each other. So for example, the student is associated with course. So will ask me question, when do you use association and when do you use this dependency? So dependency is used whenever a class is dependent or a class is inheriting some other thing or the other classes. Then when do you use association? Association represent a structured relationship, long-term relationship drawn with a solid line. One class usually has a reference or the objects of the other class. Then dependency. That is a temporary usage relationship that is short term, drawn with a dashed arrow. One class use only the other class inside a method and operation. So one class will use another class. But here they have a strong relationship. One class usually has a reference of the other objects. So for example, here how student is with the course. A student enrolls with the course. The student maintains the relationship with the course, so there is an association. For example, a car will have an engine. Then another thing is we can say when can you use dependency. We'll use a dependency when one class only uses another temporarily, such as calling one of its methods. For example, payment service will call payment gateway, but this doesn't relate with each other. For example, student will use person for login and logout, but it's not association. But student and course will be associated, so we'll use here association. So how to draw? You will create association, then you will right click on student and we'll drag it till course and leave it. So that's how you will do association. Okay, then it's done. Now there's a trick. When you right click, you see there is two things. The first association end to and if you move it will be association and from. Then to and from. To is from the student because you drag to the course. Now I'll put something number, then we'll put star. Sorry, for association into the starting we'll put it as star, and the association end from where is starting, so we'll put one. Now you see one and one star. So what does this one and star represent? See, a single student can represent in multiple courses. So a single student, it has an association with multiple courses. Like multiple courses will have association with student. Yes or no? So we'll do it like that: a course, student, and a person. A student then will have a association with multiple courses. So this is how a class diagram is done in visual paradigm software. Thank you.